Good evening and welcome to the City of Colwood Planning and Land Use Committee meeting for Monday, March 2nd, 2026 at 6:30 p.m. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'd first acknowledge with respect that we're meeting on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, and we're honored to have the opportunity to build strong working relationships with the people of the Songhees and Kasepsum nations. Look for item 2, approval of the agenda. The Planning and Land Use Committee meeting agenda for today, March 2nd, 2026. The recommendation is that the agenda be adopted as presented. Can I have a mover, please? Mr. Perry, I think, got that one. So we'll, all those opposed? Seeing none, the agenda for this evening is adopted. Looking for item 3, adoption of minutes, the Planning and Land Use Committee meeting minutes from back in January 5th, 2026. The recommendation is that those minutes be adopted as presented. Can I have a mover? Thank you, Kathleen. All those opposed? Seeing none. Excellent. The next item is public participation. My understanding is that we do not have anyone online for public participation, and the empty chairs are a signal that there is nobody here. So I don't think we'll have any there. I will mention just for the record that Councillor Jansen and Trina Gendel send regrets. They won't be here this evening, but Katrina Murray is online via Zoom. So hello, Katrina. We see that you're on there. I will try and make a point of keeping an eye out in case you wave your hand on anything.
Hi.
So that takes us into new business. Item 5, item 5.1 is related to Bill 44, small scale multi-unit housing implementation. And I believe Kelsey is going to take us through this. Over to you.
Thank you, committee. I'll be walking through the proposed methodology for implementing Bill 44 within the City of Colwood. So for some brief context, the province adopted Bill 44 in January of 2024, requiring 3 to 4 units on all restricted single-family lots and up to 6 units on properties located along designated bus routes by June of 2024. In May of 2024, the interpretation at the time was that Colwood did not have any restricted zones, as the city already permitted 3 units on single-family lots. That would be a detached dwelling, a secondary suite, and an accessory dwelling unit. Only minor amendments at that time were made to applicable zones just for clarity. In February of 2025, the city received a letter from the province advising alignment with the provincial site standards manual, signaling to staff that more substantial changes were expected. In October of 2025, the province passed Bill 25, which clarified that a restricted zone includes a single family, a suite, and an ADU. So as a result, staff are now proposing amendments to both the land use bylaw and the off-street parking bylaw to comply with Bill 44 and Bill 25. These amendments are required by June 30th of this year. So to recap the key Bill 44 requirements, the city must permit 3 units on lots of 279 square meters or less, 4 units on lots of 280 square meters or more, and up to 6 units must be permitted on lots within 400 meters of a prescribed bus stop. In Colwood, that would be the 95 Blink. And to qualify for SMU, lots also must be connected to sewer and to water. So this map provides a visual representation of SMU-enabled lots. The green lots there, if you can see, are not connected to sewer and therefore do not qualify for SMU. The orange lots, those ones permit 4 units as they are connected to sewer and exceed that 280 square meter lot size. The yellow lots are the large unsubdivided parcels that are exempt from SMU because they are intended for larger future developments beyond SMU or will be subdivided further in the future. So the proposed approach for implementing SMU is to create a new permitted use for all the zones shown on that previous slide. The regulations for SMU would be captured in a new Schedule C within the land use bylaw. Schedule C includes regulatory conditions such as the setbacks, the lot coverage, the height, etc. The subdivision requirements would not change in Schedule C. They would still remain governed by that applicable zone. So new definitions are also included in Schedule C to enable a variety of SMU built forms, including stacked townhomes and multiplexes. To be clear, the regulations in Schedule C are only applicable for those properties that wish to develop into a SMU built form. So that SMU built form can look like a variety of these shown on screen. A stacked townhome is intended to accommodate various top and bottom unit configurations and can be used to enable triplexes and fourplexes shown on the left there. A multiplex is intended for sites eligible for up to 6 units. So that is characterized by a single primary entrance with an interior corridor serving multiple units, as seen on that right side there. The minimum mandatory requirements under Bill 44 include removing parking for SMU developments located within that 400 meters of a prescribed bus stop, which will affect approximately 40 units in Colwood. In addition, staff are proposing the land use bylaw amendments to permit SMU as a use, along with that introduction of Schedule C. So staff are also presenting optional amendments to further align with that provincial site standards manual. These include reducing parking requirements to 1 space per unit for SMU developments. So committee may wish to recommend including this amendment for completion by June 30th of 2026. The site standards manual also recommends removing form and character development permits. So to mitigate this, key design guidelines could be included in Schedule C or into the general section of the land use bylaw. Minor design guidelines have already been included in Schedule C, but more substantial ones could be included. A form and character development permit would remain for the 5 to 6 unit developments, but would not be required for the 3 or 4 units. So this amendment would not be completed by June 30th of this year, as it would require an OCP amendment. However, it would provide direction to staff to consider removing this amendment in the next OCP review. So while the city is prohibited from holding a public hearing on SMU implementation, the city will still advertise prior to first reading. Notices will be posted in the newspaper and on the city's website. A Let's Talk Colwood page was launched when Bill 44 was first initially introduced, and staff also attended Music in the Park over the summer, and a council and committee workshop was held in November at council's direction. A Q&A webpage on the city's website will also be created if the amendments are adopted. So this tentative timeline on the screen here shows that the committee recommendation will go to the March 26th council, where council may direct staff to bring forward the amendment for first, second, and third reading on April 23rd. The tentative timeline for adoption is April 27th, which is well before the June 30th deadline of this year. So staff's recommendation is that council endorse this proposed methodology for implementing SMU, which that includes Schedule C, and direct staff to prepare the necessary amendments to the land use bylaw and the off-street parking bylaw. Committee may also consider any of the optional non-mandated amendments that were talked about just shortly ago. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelsey. Very informative and detailed. So I will look to the committee to see if there are any questions. Don't see any at the table. Oh, Mr. Perry, I do. I will go to you, sir.
I was hoping you could expand on the optional pieces that are provided. I mean, the parking is a little more self-explanatory, but I'm interested in the development permit form and character aspect and why that's part of the adoption recommendation.
Yeah, thank you very much. So currently we require a form and character development permit for lots that are 550 meters squared or less. So that is the majority of our newly subdivided lots. They're smaller lots. That's just a more common housing form. So we currently require a development permit for those lots right now. The province's direction from the provincial manual is suggesting for municipalities to adopt processes that will streamline development approvals. So reviewing form and character on a scale of single family is
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Thank you, Mairi. I can't see if Katrina has a question or anything. Perhaps I could just go to her to see.
No, I'm good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Then I would just have my own remarks on it. I think I'm not overly concerned either way. I think it will end up on the council table and have some debate there. I'm not a huge supporter of the parking variance on I mean, obviously there's the mandated components which are necessary, and no point beating that around the table, but the parking piece concerns me. I think parking in Colwood is a hot button issue, and arbitrarily reducing it to sort of align with the province may align us with the province, but it won't align us with the community. And I think it's important to note that there are a lot of folks active in this community that have concerns around parking in particular. And I would say the view on Bill 44 and initiatives that surround it is different in outlying municipality versus downtown, for example, in a Victoria or in a very dense area like Vancouver. So I personally am not a fan of that, and I'm also inclined just to leave the form and character DP requirement in there as well. Again, now how much of this is just my own bias, I don't know. And then, like I say, so I'm not too concerned either way. I do see things like the province, for example, canceling their affordable housing funding and what that's meant to a number of municipalities that had projects partly underway. So on the one hand, they're telling us to do all these things and they're aligned with best practices, and this will address the housing issue, when those of us that believe it's more of an affordability crisis than a true housing crisis, see the juxtaposition between canceling programs that really would make a difference versus sort of performative stuff like this. So I'm opposed to the optional amendments, but I'd first see if there's any motion from the table at all around the staff recommendations before I try my hand at anything. I don't see anything. So, well, maybe I would move that we forward to council the recommendation from staff without the optional amendments at this stage. So I would say the first 2 points are what I would be moving. And then I'll go to the floor for commentary. I see Kathleen, you have a comment here.
Yeah, I just want to express an opposite opinion. With respect to the parking, what I'm hearing incredibly loudly is that even though everybody understands we have to build more homes, the complaint is none of them are affordable. And I'm seeing that, and I have a real concern with that. So in terms of the parking issues, it is legitimate that in order to limit the amount of parking that is required, that's, I think, one of the major ways we can create affordable units. So for me, it's very, very key. I'm also a very strong proponent in terms of what I've noted in the materials is modal shift. And I'm also not seeing that at all. This is an extremely car forward community. And I think I've mentioned this before, if there's any place, given our climate, we should be able to encourage e-bikes, transit. It's not freezing cold. It's just, I personally think we don't have any excuse for not trying harder. And I understand we're all set in our ways. We're used to our multiple cars, but quite frankly, that's outweighed, in my opinion, based on issues with the environment, but also the major one is the affordability issue. I just think we have to push that way for that reason. I'm just not seeing affordable units. People laugh when they see what's coming up. It's right. I mean, literally, we are really just building units that nobody can afford. So You know, a lot of people are not going to like that. But frankly, the developers or whoever decides that what they're gonna do with these MMUs, I'm assuming they can put in more parking spots if they think that's what the market will bear. This is just the minimum, right? It's lowered. So it's not a huge deal. And I certainly would be really disappointed to find out that it can't go lower than what it is currently because of affordability. We're not there. Or, I mean, again, we're also not there in terms of the modal shift. It's just really disappointing to me. So I feel very strongly on that part. And on the second optional amendment, I am of the opposite view, which is that red tape needs to be reduced. So I support completely the optional amendments as well.
Great, thank you. And some really valid points, certainly. I don't think we disagree on the affordability issue. I think right now we're building a lot of units that don't really address that, hence my criticism around the province removing the only program that really was in place to fund that. And again, I'm not entirely tied to this motion, so I'm happy to do a friendly amendment if need be, just to revert back to the staff one. But I'll wait and hear if there's any other commentary to this. I don't know either from Katrina or James if you had to speak to it. Mr. Perry.
Yeah, I'm mostly aligned with Kathleen on this one. I know that I had concerns over the a previous application that came through that eliminated all parking. But I am trying to be conscious of the car forward community as mentioned, and therefore trying to meet in the middle and find ways to be a bit more focused on the mode shift that was mentioned previously. So I do like that, where when it comes to like a higher density um, building, you can find ways to cut out some of the extra space needed for vehicles when there may be good access to extra transit or the bicycle pathways. Similarly for line item 2, knowing that the next agenda item is focusing on bringing more to the council table through development permit, I think it is wise to be conscious of how much extra time we are going to be putting through the council focusing on development permit requirements. So I think putting that forward to council with the upcoming agenda item that'll likely move forward as well provides as much of the tool in the toolbox perspective to find what council finds as a happy middle ground for how much should and should not be going to council for development permits.
Great, thank you, James. Yeah, in light of that, I think, as I said, I wasn't really feeling too strongly either way, and I think it's in the best interest of the community, you know, hearing from both on it with divergent opinions from mine, that this go forward in its entirety. That would leave it open for anyone on council to then remove it from the consent agenda at that time, and you know, if they had any particular need to discuss it. So I would see this as, it was my motion. I'll just, if you have no objections, I would do a friendly amendment and just modify it to accept the staff recommendation and forward it on to council. So with that, then I would call the question, all those in favor? It's 3-4, so that's unanimous. Okay, so that will move forward. Thank you. I appreciate the discussion on that one. That will move us to item 5.2, which is a motion to amend delegation of authority for form and character development permits. And I believe Mairi, your manager of planning, is going to present on this one.
Great, thank you very much, and good evening, committee. So tonight I will be presenting on the notice of motion related to delegated authority for development permits. So this originally went to council at the meeting on January 12th, where council referred it to the Planning and Land Use Committee. That was originally scheduled for the February meeting, which was ultimately canceled, and that brings us here this evening at the March Planning and Land Use Committee. So this is the notice of motion. I'm not intending on reading the entire thing to you, but what I hope to do this evening is explain the components of the notice of motion, just to ensure that you have a good understanding of our sort of existing situation related to delegated authority at the City of Colwood. But a very high level summary of the notice of motion is the main intent of it is to shift the approval of development permits for form and character from staff back to council for approval. The real intention there is to improve transparency surrounding development within the city. Right now, council and the public have opportunities to provide input and see developments at the time of rezoning, but not of what the development will actually look like at the time of development permit. The notice of motion also recognizes work that has gone into our master plan communities, and I'll get a little bit into more of that later. And it also recognizes that we are undergoing a review of our development approvals process right now as well. So the City of Colwood has the development permit delegation bylaw, which was adopted in 2018. So the Local Government Act authorizes municipalities to delegate authority over development permits to staff. So at the City of Colwood, we have this bylaw that has delegated full approval and authority to currently the CAO and the Director of Planning over approvals for development permits. So right now, the delegation bylaw allows the CAO to approve and issue all development permits, to make amendments to development permits that have already been issued, to extend development permits. So currently development permits have a 2-year expiration date where they must substantially start construction or else they expire. So we have received quite a few requests for extensions to development permits lately, which the CAO can approve. The CAO can also impose conditions on development permits in terms of phasing, and can also request security, which at the City of Colwood we use for landscaping. So the official community plan is our tool to designate development permit areas, which is authorized by the Local Government Act. So the City of Colwood has 3 development permit areas: an environmental development permit area, a hazard development permit area, and a forming character development permit area. So what that means is if you are conducting activities such as land alteration, building a home, renovating, or adding an addition onto a building within a development permit area, you require a development permit unless you meet one of the exemptions that are identified within the OCP. So these development permit areas live within our OCP and include design guidelines. So when we receive a development permit application, we assess that application against those design guidelines. So that includes massing, siting, access, landscaping, things like that. So our form and character development permit area has sub areas. So we have the intensive residential. So that is similar to what we were speaking about before about the form and character development permits for properties that are less than 550 meters squared. So that's our intensive residential, which is more commonly known as small lots, basically. The intensive residential one also includes duplexes and attached housing in all lots within our hillside designation. And then the other areas within our form and character development permit area largely aligns with the land use designations within the OCP. So we have hillside, we have mixed use employment center, which is Allendale and parts of Island Highway. We have the landing and beachlands, and then the commons in Latoria South. So largely related to those land use designations, but each of them have their own design guidelines. So the notice of motion also recognizes recent changes to provincial legislation, which of course we just discussed before as well. So as part of Bill 44, it has prohibited municipalities to hold public hearings for residential developments that comply with the OCP. So we no longer hold public hearings for those applications. The public is still given an opportunity to speak when the bylaw is introduced at first reading, but it occurs at a sort of different period in the process and not as formal as a public hearing would be. Bill 44 also requires municipalities to permit 3 to 6 units on low density lots. So that change, for example, for the 6 units, prior to Bill 44 and small scale multi-unit housing being introduced, if someone were wanting to build a 6-plex, that would require a rezoning application. So that is sort of removing that step with the implementation of Bill 44. Further, Bill 47, which is our transit-oriented areas, that legislation requires municipalities to enable specific density and height around exchanges. So within Colwood, that is the Colwood Exchange. So within 200 meters, we must enable 10 stories and an FAR of 3.5. And then within 400 meters, we have to enable up to 6 stories and an FAR of 2.5 and no parking. Those applications still require a rezoning application, but council cannot deny that application on the basis of height and density. So these just represent sort of fundamental shifts in the way that we plan, the way that we can provide input and review applications. So next is discussing our current development approvals process. So right now we have rezoning applications that are presented at council, and this has been a topic at the council table and as well at this table, that when we do bring forward a rezoning application and we're showing a site plan, that it is really conceptual. And what I mean by that is a rezoning is to enable height, the permitted uses, density, the regulations. And so when we're showing a site plan, that is one way that that property can meet those zoning regulations that we're proposing as part of that rezoning application. There are other configurations that are possible with those zoning regulations that are proposed. So what we have seen is that when somebody comes in for a development permit, it could be very different from what was presented at rezoning stage. Currently, we have typically been allowing people to submit a development permit application once the application has received third reading at council. And that is really just because of that certainty perspective. If they're developing development permit level plans, they would want to have certainty that they're actually going to have that zoning, that their zoning will be approved. Otherwise, the development permit would not comply with the zone. Another thing that we have been seeing is we would have rezoning applications that are adopted and we might not see a development permit for 5, 10, 20 years. So there's a lot of uncertainty with the timing of development as well. And once an application receives their zoning, council and the public are not involved in the process anymore. Development permits, of course, are delegated to staff, so there's no longer an opportunity to provide input on what it will ultimately look like. So right now, what we are council has directed staff to proceed with reviewing our development approvals process. So it was presented to council as one of the projects for us to focus on in 2026, and we will be applying for a grant as well. One of the tasks that we will be looking at is looking at a concurrent rezoning development permit process. So what that means is that we will be bringing forward development permit level plans at the time of rezoning. And so there will be a lot more certainty about when a property would be developed, because that 2-year timeline, that sort of clock would start as soon as the zoning is adopted. And so unless we permit an extension to the development permit, that property has to substantially start construction within 2 years of the zoning. Right now, we have no certainty of when a development will actually start. Next is the master plan communities. So the notice of motion recognizes that we have a few master plan communities that have sub-area plans or local area plans within our OCP. So that is largely Beachlands and Latoria South. And they have specific design guidelines for their developments. So that is above and beyond the existing design guidelines that we have within our OCP. So that is sort of another step that they have conducted, and that allows staff to review those applications against those specific design guidelines. So the notice of motion speaks to those properties being appropriate for delegated authority, so appropriate for staff approval. Not sure what happened there. Okay. And next is the CRD comparison. So, oh, I didn't do that. So for the record, I did send out an email to the committee ahead of the meeting with an updated table that will be amended to the agenda tomorrow. We did undertake a further review of how development permit authority is exercised across the CRD, and the way we originally conveyed that information was overly simplified, and it's a lot more nuanced than that. Several municipalities use a more of a hybrid approach to delegated authority. So they've have specified specific development permits that would be appropriate for delegated authority. And then they've identified development permits that should really be going to council for approval. So based on our review, it is actually only Oak Bay, Metchosin, and Highlands who have full council approval. The other municipalities have that more of a hybrid approach. So we just wanted to sort of correct the information, ensure that we are sort of conveying it appropriately. And finally, I just wanted to show an example of how this delegated authority has sort of worked on the ground. So this is the speed wash. This is sort of one of those examples that has been brought up a lot about how a rezoning application can go and what happens after rezoning into the development permit phase. So this is the speed wash. These are the plans that were presented to council at the time of rezoning. So you'll see the actual car wash itself is on the opposite side of the property as it is today on the ground. And there are a number of buildings that are fronting and framing the intersection of Souk and VMP. The next image is the original development permit. So you'll see that the car wash flipped to the side that it is existing today. And then there are still a few commercial buildings that are framing that intersection. But those buildings are different from what was presented at the rezoning stage. And then finally, this is the amended development permit. So this is showing the car wash on the side that it is today on the ground, with those commercial buildings removed and replaced with the vacuum facilities. So post rezoning, these decisions happened at the staff level. So that's just an example of how delegated authority has worked, and certainly an example that has been brought up frequently. And then that is the recommendation, which essentially is for council to direct staff to come back with a comprehensive report of what it sort of means to return form and character development permits back to council. As I mentioned, we would get an application for development permit and we review that against our design guidelines in the OCP. Of course, we review the applications against the land use bylaw and any development agreements. It goes through our typical internal process for referrals. If these applications were turned back to council for approval, of course, that would involve a report to council. It would go to Planning and Land Use Committee first, who would then give a recommendation to council on these applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Mari. There is a lot there, and I think I just briefly speak to it before I go to the table here on it. And I think it's important from my perspective, at least I can only speak for myself, not for the rest of the council, but it isn't about slowing down development. I've certainly never purported to be anti-development nor, waving the development banner. I'm all for sustainable development. And I think having an efficient process with the city is critical. Kathleen, you mentioned it, kind of removing some of the red tape to build housing. And, I think being able to move forward effectively is key. What I'm interested in specifically, and I thank you, Mari, for the example. The speed watch is a great example where initially I can speak again from my perspective. I voted against it the first time we saw it because I thought it wasn't right. I'm tired of, car dealerships all up and down the strip, right? I just thought, okay, this is another incarnation of that. And I was convinced otherwise the second go around because of much needed commercial business that was going to front VMP and Souk Road. There were going to be commercial outlets, restaurants, all sorts of stories were told about what was going to be there that would also provide a visual and noise barrier. And I don't need to beat the drum on it. You saw the 3 photos, how we started there, we migrated to the next one, and we end up with the abomination we have today, which had it ended up the way it is, I would have maintained my no vote on that. So I think that speaks to the challenge right now we have of being sold a bill of goods on one thing, and then when we get to the DP phase, something entirely different goes out to the community, and you're left trying to defend something which doesn't look like what you were sold on initially. And the term bait and switch has been thrown around by a number of people I've talked to, right? It's pretty common. And the other egregious example I'd go all the way back to in Royal Bay within a master planned community, which is why I'll also be introducing an amendment here to how a community, many homes are sold on the basis of a neighborhood house moving in and what that meant to the area. And under the exact same rezoning amendment that had been given, it was sold to a different developer who initially threw up a proposal for 3 incredibly dense high-rise towers on the same lot. That completely went against the spirit of the master plan and the vision for that community and what the neighbors wanted. And speaks to why I think some of this is important. So I just wanted to lead off with that for me, at least, it's not about slowing things down or making things more difficult. It's about delivering on a promise or delivering on a vision. That's kind of how I see it. So with that, I'll open it up to the table and to Katrina online as well for comments, questions, anything. James does not want to go first again, but he has to. If he's anything but consistent, and I respect that. Mr. Perry, over to you, sir.
I don't like the way that I am. Okay. Today, does staff have the ability to defer up to council? At face value, looking on the outside in and acknowledging that there are issues at play, it almost feels like our design guidelines are more lacking, or the instruction to staff around what is acceptable and what's not based on what came forward during rezoning isn't conveyed or well enough documented so that they can uphold the vision in the first place. So I'm just really interested in what mechanisms, I'll start with the first question. Is there any ability today for staff to just defer up to council rather than making everything go to council?
Yes, there is. Yeah, the CAO or Director of Planning, who are the delegated personnel, can send a development permit at any time to council for approval.
Can you speak to the frequency to which that authority is leveraged in recent past?
Very minimal.
Okay. The other, in your interpretation of the recommendation, which is mostly please direct staff to do so. So I understand that it's still not in a high fidelity sort of state. It sounds like you're going to be targeting the hybrid approach versus the full council approval. The thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around is if developers are looking for certainty before moving towards preparing a development permit, and they get that certainty through rezoning, how do you foresee the rezoning and permit moving together working successfully?
So the concurrent development permit and rezoning process is not necessarily an outcome of this notice of motion. That will be explored as part of our review of the development approvals process. I would say there is certainly risk to the developer to have to create development permit level plans essentially at the time of rezoning. It is just more costly and they need more detail than what we currently require at rezoning. I wouldn't say it's uncommon though. Other municipalities certainly have a concurrent development permit and rezoning process. And I would say they're developing these development permit level plans, but it provides more certainty to the public and council at the time of rezoning, which would likely improve their chances of approval if they're like ready to commit, like ready to start that clock of 2 years at the time of rezoning.
Okay. So the closing sentiment I have is that I see Colwood Council doing a lot of great things, and that is arguably obtainable through the capacity to spend time looking at the advancements that this city is making. And so bringing all of those additional agenda items forward to council brings with it the inability to focus on many other things that I think is advancing and making Colwood a notable place to live. And so while I struggle to resist the intent because public transparency is a massive issue, and even I in my limited time living in Colwood have also experienced that multiple times, and so I do want what the intent is, but I worry that we will be detracting from our ability to do much more than that, and be transparent about just development. So through improved design guidelines, improved instruction to the CAO for appropriate ways to escalate up to council, I think there could be avenues in that sort of hybrid approach that I know that you're looking for. And so most of my narrative is to maybe guide or speak to what a hybrid approach may actually look like, rather than saying all stuff must go up to council and consume that time, that very limited resource of council time. So thank you.
Thank you, James. And just before I go to Kathleen, maybe perhaps Mairi or perhaps Mr. Johnson could clarify, do we have any kind of assessment, I guess, based on historical volume, what kind of time we'd be looking at the council table in terms of managing this, you know, per James' question there?
I think maybe I can answer first and Mairi can add value afterwards. You know, the council's agendas have really changed with the additional changes that the province has made with respect to small unit municipal housing, what needs to come in front of council, what happens with public hearings. In my time here, we've had 2 separate public hearing nights in 14 months. That's completely different than what we've seen with development proposals in the past. And I think what this does is puts council back into the driver's seat in terms of what is being proposed at rezoning is actually what's going to be built. And then there's that timeline that starts with it. So when the public hearing happens and you get a chance to see what the design guidelines look like and what it looks like currently, a developer can come in and say, this is what we think it's going to look like, approve the rezoning. Then the rezoning sits until the market comes around and a lot changes, right? And we can see that with the car wash, and there are other examples that are out there. What this does is it provides the public an opportunity to comment on what that detailed design will look like through the rezoning, and then ultimately the development permit that would be approved afterwards. So it provides surety. Right now, there isn't that surety in terms of a proposal will come forward, the rezoning happens, and then the property will sit. And in some cases, that property sits, and sometimes it gets sold to other property owners, and they have a different design philosophy than that original developer. So what this does is it gives surety to the public as to what's going to be built and the timelines. And yes, it is going to cost developers more, but at the end of the day, for them to realize their development, they're going to have to go through the development permit anyway. So this, in effect, will stop a lot of the land speculation component that we see, where we see a lot of these rezoned properties that sit for a period of time. People have an expectation when they come to the public hearing to understand that this is what's going to happen, and then it sits for 4 or 5 years, or however length of time that is. Then the developer could come in with that development permit application that would be approved to staff. What I see this being is an interim step, right? There is time at the council table now, considering all the changes that have happened with land use. And this gives surety to the public and council about what's going to be built. And that timeline starts from when that gets approved. So it puts that surety back to the public, to council, and to staff about what's going to be built, and to understand what capacity is being used, because that development has a time frame that starts. So it's a lot easier for us to predict. One of the things that we do every year is a bit of a forecast. What do we think we're going to see for development in the upcoming year? And it's a lot like forecasting the weather, right? It's our best guess of what we think is going to happen. This then provides surety that we can come to council, and this is what's on the books right now. This is what's being proposed. And it is a change, it is a shift, but this isn't a shift that we haven't seen in other municipalities. In my previous experience in Victoria, we did have delegated authority. Mayfair Mall, that addition that happened at Mayfair Mall was actually done by an internal staff approval for that development permit. Massive development, massive changes. The public really didn't have that opportunity to see that when it came forward. And this puts that surety back in there. And as development ebbs and flows, and right now we're in a bit of a slowdown within the process, we have that time to bring it back to council. And if development ramps back up and we see that delays are starting to happen, that's when we bring another report to council and say, perhaps this isn't working. Perhaps in these cases, this is a development permit that you can delegate to staff because we have that appropriate level of design guidelines. But I think with what we've seen with some of the examples, the public has been surprised in some cases about what's being built. And I think that this gets back to what Mayor Kobayashi and that notice of motion brought forward, is to bring that surety back to the council table. I understand your concern about the business of council around the table, but you can see, development related agendas aren't what they used to be a few years ago. So this would be that interim step that allows us to get to that gap, fill the holes, and then to come back and say, is this working or is this not working? What we would suggest is that when council considers this, is that you give it a timeline, right? That council would say, we'll try this for a year, then we'll bring back a report, see the numbers that have come forward to council, what had been delegated to staff in the past, to quantify what that looks like.
Yeah, and just to add, the notice of motion, and as Jason mentioned, we do recognize that there has been a decline in applications that we have received, and that is really just because of the market. Development activity is certainly very dependent on the market. We have been telling applicants that development permits typically take 4 to 6 months, and I wouldn't say requiring to develop a report to council and going to council would necessarily extend that whatsoever, given our current application levels. I would also say when we're talking about a hybrid approach, I think that there are some form and character development permits that would be very appropriate for council approval, but things like the Bill 44, the intensive residential form and character development permits might still be appropriate for staff approval. We see quite a few of those single family homes that require development permits. So we can certainly consider sub areas within the development, within the form and character development permit area that could be appropriate for staff versus council. So just adding sort of that context related to the hybrid approach. The notice of motion also does not include our environmental or hazard development permits as well. So we do have a lot of hillside properties. They all have environmental development permit requirements, lots of riparian around the city as well. So that would still be delegated to staff.
Great, thank you, Mairi, and thank you, Jason. A little light, I might get you to expand on that. But I'm going to go to Kathleen next. Thank you.
I understand exactly where Mr. Perry's coming from. And I have to say, initially, upon reading the materials, I thought to myself, wait a minute, Colwood is growing and we want less delegation. So it kind of flies in the face of my own logic. So I support what Mr. Perry is emphasizing, and I just suggest that there be an abundance of flexibility when it comes to a hybrid approach. I also am heartened to hear that it's perhaps perceived as an interim approach, and I would hope that we actually do take a look at how it's working. And I, like Mr. Perry, want to see council working on things that they're doing great things with and spending more time on that. So the example of residential, I mean, I think that we're going to swamp council if we're to do that. So I understand completely where the sentiment is coming from. I've rant every time I drive that car wash. And I'm just not close enough to it at present, but my initial thought when I read the material was that the example of the kind of change in heart rather than switch and bait with Royal Bay, where we were going to have a community center, and that got dropped. And the question that I have, and it doesn't really matter, but it's just to be, I hope that this becomes part of the discussion or the formulation of a good plan. The thought I had there is, why did that happen? And were there terms in the 217 covenant that we could have had which were stronger, and obviously have a legal background, but typically we're the pessimists who put in clauses into our agreements for when things go wrong, because inevitably they do. Everybody's all rosy and happy and don't want to hear what the lawyer is telling them. And we have to be the pessimist in the group. So there are, again, I'm not close enough to it to suggest how it could be done. And that's only coming from my own experience, but there are ways without pushing every issue up to council. And I hope there is creativity there. So for example, with that community center example, I would have thought that there would be remedies within the covenants and of security in the form of, so the typical kind of contractual arrangements where you can fix some of that stuff. So I just ask that we kind of broaden our scope in terms of how do we really want to do this? Are there other ways that we can manage these particular issues, right? I mean, I'm not close enough to it, but I just think that creativity would be really, really welcome. So I'm very heartened to hear that you're going to look at it kind of as an interim project. And again, flexibility is key. And and maybe checking with even larger jurisdictions, how they approach these matters, because again, I understand it's a lull, but I always kind of get nervous when I hear people say, oh, but it's not busy right now. And then they come back and you've done all this paperwork and it's like, no, it's busy now, right? And so all of that stuff. So I just encourage everybody to really put some thought into it, think about some really creative ways of beefing up what we do administratively so that the burden isn't completely on council. Totally get why they want to see everything right now, because that's kind of horrific to find out that what you thought you were getting is just not what you got. So I totally understand both sides of things, but I come with a legal background and a business background. So I always look for creativity in terms of how we can streamline, and streamlining is really important these days for development. So just my own thoughts.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. And I think, you know, briefly, I think point 2 in the recommendation is to establish a streamlined council approval process. So not exactly what you're saying, but I think the goal is to maintain efficiency. Being closer to it, I understand the reasoning behind the motion, and I think it really is to address a lot of concern that's community driven, to be honest with you, that you know, council is not in control of what happens. And from a council member's perspective, it is incredibly frustrating when something happens and you say, well, that's not what I voted for. That's not what I thought would happen, or I didn't know that was going to happen. And I recognize in any organization, I mean, I work for a large international company. I'm not going to know everything that happens, but there is a certain point where you know, when you're the person held responsible for it, that you at least need awareness of it. And I think the other byproduct of this that I think could be interesting is, and I use Havenwood as an example, the empty lot that's there when you drive up BMP every day. And we see in the news in Langford that that's kind of a common occurrence right now, is that, you know, a lot was, you know, purchased and a big hole was dug. We had our own off Whale Road for a long time. Colwood Corners was like that for a long time, where you end up with grandiose ideas. You get a giant pit in the ground, people run out of money or financing changes, wherever it is, and then there it is for years on end. And I'm hopeful that these steps might, you know, allow us to address that a little bit more efficiently. From my view, I think I'm open to see whatever comes back. I think some sort of hybrid form is clearly the way to go, that most other municipalities are doing. And I think the reality is right now we can see that we're one of, I think, only 3 that are kind of exclusive where we are, which informs me a little bit as well that we're not doing it the best way, that there's room for improvement. But the piece that's missing for me, and it's funny when we mentioned the, you know, that particular lot in the Commons in Royal Bay, is around master plan communities, which is not included in here. And the concern I have is a very real one, and it's proven by history now that, you know, when you have a master plan community and it's delegated to staff to manage that, if the developer chooses to sell off portions of that, there is no longer any council control or city control over the vision of what that master plan community should be. It ceases to exist. So whatever zoning is in place can be picked up by whoever the new owner is. They can proceed with whatever they want, essentially, depending on the nature of it. And I would use, for example, like let's talk about the beachlands for a moment. Down in zone 8 there, where they talk about building a hotel, where you know, there's the possibility of that. But there's, and Mr. Perry, you brought this up, I think, in our meeting subject, is that there's a wide range of zoning that applies already to that particular parcel. So hypothetically, you could have a scenario where the developer comes forward and says, well, we want to build a 6-story boutique hotel. It's going to be fantastic. It meets the OCP, you know, vision for this to be a destination waterfront community. Everybody could get behind it because they're promising a restaurant and a whole bunch of things, and it's wonderful. We make a few amendments to it. And a couple of years later, housing market's slower for whatever reason. They've hit their profit margins and all of the other elements of the development. They decide they don't want to do that anymore. And so they just flip it and they sell it to XYZ company out of Calgary or Toronto or Vancouver, who decide that, no, we don't want to build a hotel there, but we're going to use that zoning to build a, you know, office space and whatever it might be. So the benefit to the community is gone, but nothing's really changed. The zoning was there. So you know, I worry about some of the master plan communities and, you know, what the outcome is, you know, for example, in Latoria South and Royal Bay or with the Beachlands or with others, without some sort of scenario whereby if you go to sell that property, you know, the advantages you gain through zoning amendments and things disappear. They go away with that. So sure, you can sell it, but now we have to have a discussion about what can be built there. Yeah, and so that's something that I'd like to see. So I'd like to propose an amendment, and I know I spoke with staff about the possibility, and I'm not sure if it's feasible to amend the original notice of motion by adding a component in speaking to master plan communities. I know you had that email, maybe Heather. So I'd first propose, sorry. Oh, and I see Katrina has her hand up. I'll go to you in just a moment there, Katrina, but I'm
Okay.
going to propose informally, I'm not proposing it yet. I'm going to go to Katrina first, but I'm going to propose adding in a component around the master plan communities and reference to it in bullet point 1 on the staff recommendation, just because I want to see that at least have some lively discussion at the council table. But sorry, I see Mr. Johnson has a comment here first, then I'll go to Katrina.
And not speaking about beachlands or path developments, but we have other developments that are in receivership. And they have been master plan communities. And what happens in receivership is they go to whoever makes the best bid on the property, and that changes things dramatically. So it's not just sale. It also comes down to when a property hits receivership, somebody else picks it up, and that's not their same vision, right? That same vision likely needs to come back to council to make sure that it's meeting the scope that it was originally approved in. And we've got a number of those right now out there in the community that we're dealing with, where we've got people that are proposing different uses on these properties that council considered in their entirety as not a master plan community like a beachlands or path, but a large development proposal with a number of different unique uses that they're looking to change dramatically from what went to the public. So this allows council the opportunity to see that when it comes back. And I think the key part of this is surety, right? That the public knows it's going to be built in 2 years. And if it doesn't, then that development permit lapses, and then it has to come back to council for approval for what that new ownership would look like. And in terms of the master plan communities, what Councillor Ward is suggesting is if it does change hands, to make sure that that consistency is there. It's not there to slow development down. It's just to make sure that there's a consistency component that goes along with that.
Great, thank you. And I'll just hold off on discussing this for the moment. I haven't formally made the motion. I wanted to give Katrina a time here. She's got her hand up there. Please go ahead, Katrina.
Hi, thanks, Ian. I just wanted to make sure, based on that point that you had just made, if that is something, like, maybe I'm naive, but if it does change hands, can it be automatically, it has to be forced to go to council and then it reverts back to its original zoning? Like, is that a possibility?
At present, that is not the case, but maybe Mr. Johnson, with the proposed amendment, and I suppose under the community charter, is that, as Katrina asked, a possibility?
So this proposed amendment is for master plan communities, and if the ownership of a property within one of those master plan communities changes ownership, then that development permit would have to be approved by council. So the notice of motion is for those master plan communities to be exempted from approval by council, so it would remain with staff. But if it changes ownership, what this amendment is speaking to is that that development permit would then go back to council for approval.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Katrina?
Yeah, I think that that's exactly what I was envisioning and hoping for.
Thank you. Yeah, and really that's my goal here. And I'd reached out to staff in advance to, you know, to seek the appropriate place and wording for this, because that really is the goal. So to clarify, it isn't to take away the delegation that exists today to staff on a master plan community. So for example, in master plan community X, if they come forward and it's already planned to do, you know, a 6-story condo in the southwest corner, that carries on. There's no slowing things down, no stopping things. It's if, hey, we no longer want to do that for whatever reason, we want to sell that piece to somebody else, they want to do something different, it's to have some say in the matter, which I think at the end of the day is what I know I'm looking for, and certainly I think others in council are looking for, is just to make sure that we don't get speed washed again. Really is what it comes down to. So this is the amendment that I'm proposing to add to the original notice of motion. So I will make that motion, and then I'll call the question on the amendment. All those in favor? I see myself. Actually, yeah, sorry, I'll pull the vote for a moment. I'll put the motion out there, and then let's have a discussion, speak to the motion here. I won't motivate any further. I think I've said my bit, but I'll go to you, Mr. Perry, for questions and comment.
I was hoping to not necessarily explore it, but understand this particular amendment a little bit further, where only through change of hands are we interested in the council approval of development permits. But and this is where perhaps I'm a little naive around what a master plan actually entails and prescribes, but I'm trying to understand how the original developer, if they were to have a slight change of heart, couldn't do the exact same thing, and we get the proverbial speed wash. And so again, just to reinforce a previous point, it speaks to a lack of good guidelines and expectations out of a master plan, rather than like it being like the fault of a developer, or rather like the sale being the issue at hand. It's like the root cause is a change of heart, and that can happen to anyone. And so while I think that this closes the gap a little bit, I don't think the door is closed in terms of the public visibility. And when you look at like Path that used to be Cablecraft, and maybe they'll rebrand again, the the change of heart of very large communities like that can still happen internally, and I want to make sure that we're capturing those pieces as well, that I don't necessarily think that this amendment captures, while still like capturing some of the issue at hand. So if there's not necessarily a way to make that fulsome, but rather acknowledge that it's not entirely encompassing, that's mostly my intent.
So just to comment on that. So I think the intent of this is that obviously when we're referring to master plan communities, it's Beachlands and Latoria South primarily. So Path, as an example, they are the ones who developed those design guidelines that are within their sub area plan. They are very familiar with those guidelines. We review their development permit applications against those guidelines, and we recommend changes to their site plans to ensure alignment with those design guidelines. But when we introduce a new property owner who is not as familiar with those design guidelines, with the quality of development of Path as an example, that introduces uncertainty. And so I think returning these development permits back to council approval provides certainty and transparency to council and the public, that despite it being a different owner, there is still opportunity to uphold that quality and alignment with those design guidelines. So I think that staff will still play our part in negotiating alignment of the site plans with those design guidelines, but I think it's ultimately a transparency piece. So I just wanted to make that comment.
To clarify, if a lot is sold that was part of a master plan, it no longer falls under the original master plan?
So it will still fall under that master plan. So if it changes ownership, zoning, development agreements, all those things run with the land, not the owner.
Right, okay, thanks for clarifying.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mari, and thank you, James. I can't see Katrina. I don't know if you have any questions at all.
No, I'm okay right now. Thank you.
Okay. And Kathleen, anything from you? No. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. It's pretty comprehensive, and I think some really valid questions were asked in terms of, you know, what does that look like in terms of council time? What does that look like kind of long term if things pick up again? You know, for the moment, I'm of the opinion that it answers a lot of the questions that thus far I've been unable to get answers to, in the ability to control some of the development that happens in the community. And control is maybe a bad term, because I think that implies maybe restricting or you know, holding back from it. I think it's less about that than it is, as Mr. Johnson said, surety, just being able to feel some degree of confidence that what was proposed and what has been talked about and what is publicized is what's going to be followed through. Now, I think in this particular field or industry or what have you, that there is no full guarantee. I think, you know, there are so many other factors too, in fairness to the development community. I mean, financing rates change and cost of goods change and land costs change. And, you know, I mean, there are always going to be other factors that influence it. But I think where we can retain our control in terms of being able to say confidently to the public that what was promised is what will be delivered is really the end goal here. And then I don't know if it's perfect or not, but I think there's certainly more room for debate. I do want to make the motion to include this piece. I believe generally, and speaking to what you're saying, Mr. Perry, in terms of keeping a developer and master plan community kind of aligned with the guidelines. In fairness, I would say staff and developers have worked together very well in Colwood. You know, I would say you know, the Latoria North and South development is what it, you know, should have been in terms of what was promised, in terms of the parks plan that's there, many of those components. So no criticism of anybody there. I think when it's the actual developer who has a lot at stake, developing according to those guidelines that they've in many cases designed and agreed to with the staff, there isn't really an issue. It's only when it, in my experience, at least in this city, it's only when, you know, different ownership really takes it on. Then you don't have that shared vision anymore. You don't have those years of cooperation built up between the city and the developer. You know, you've just got an outside party who's paid a lump sum for a piece of land with a certain amount of zoning on it, and they want to do what they want to do. So that's where the concern lies, I think, right now is certainly not with the owners or the delegation as it stands today, but with, you know, that change of hands. So so I would move that we incorporate this in so that staff can examine that that component as part of the recommendation. So I would move to vote on the amendment first and then on the recommendation. So I would ask for a vote. All those, I'll call the question, all those in favor. Okay, I see 3 in favor, 4 in favor. So unanimous on the amendment, and then on then the overarching recommendation to council, then I'm prepared to move the recommendation. Did we want to have some discussion on that? Or I see no interest there. So a vote then on the recommendation as amended. All those in favor, sorry. So that's unanimous as well. Excellent. That takes us to the all important item 6, which is adjournment. So with that, we shall adjourn the meeting. I would like to thank staff that are here tonight, those online, and those at the table, and Katrina for your efforts. And I think some great discussion, great questions, and I'll make note of some of them for when they come to the council table, because some really good points were raised. Thank you. Good night.